The Capital Investment Committee hearing for March 4th is called to order. Vice Chair Ryer, can I have a motion to approve the minutes for February 26th?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the minutes for February 26, 2024.
Vice Chair Ryer moves approval of the minutes for February 26th. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the minutes are adopted. With us today, we will be hearing. Okay, so members, we do have another set of minutes. I apologize. Vice Chair Ryer, can I have a motion to approve the minutes for February 28th?
I move approval of the minutes for February 28, 2024.
Vice Chair Ryer move approval of the minutes for February 28th. Any discussion? Hearing none, those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and the minutes are adopted. Okay, so members, today we'll move over to the governor's bonding recommendation for the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency, and then we'll take action on 2 housing bills with Chair Howard. And then after that, we'll have an informational hearing only on the modifications bill. With that, welcome, Commissioner. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Chair and members of the committee, this is Rachel Robinson. I'm the Deputy Commissioner at Minnesota Housing. With me is Amanda Welliver on our policy team. Commissioner Jennifer Ho is in Washington, D.C. today, advocating for housing. We have a short presentation on the governor's capital bill for housing today. Try to get through it pretty quickly, and then leave a little time for questions and many of the others in the room. So the governor's budget, we're here to talk about it today, and it's because we need more housing. You will hear all of us at Minnesota Housing say that over and over again. We need more housing, especially for those with the lowest incomes, because our shortage statewide is 50,000 units of affordable housing. And we need to preserve housing. We've done a great job building a lot of affordable housing, including with federal subsidy, but that housing needs ongoing investment to remain affordable and in good quality. Homelessness, unacceptably high levels of homelessness in Minnesota also need a response, with over 8,000 people experiencing homelessness every night, 2,000 who are sleeping outside. Housing instability is something that many people face, even if currently housed, and 215,000 households in Minnesota are making less than $50,000 a year and spending way too much on housing, or are cost burdened, as we say. And there are many disparities in housing across the spectrum from rental to home ownership, particularly for Minnesotans who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So the governor's proposal is to continue our program of housing infrastructure bonds with an investment of $50 million. And this will create or preserve or rehab estimated 500 homes and $7.5 million for public housing rehab, which would again have the rehabilitation preservation of 375 homes. So housing infrastructure bonds, a program that we've, it's become part of our day-to-day at Minnesota Housing. To give you a brief primer, the vast majority of affordable housing in Minnesota is privately owned. Love this pie chart because it shows the approximately 5% that would be eligible to get general obligation bonds because it is publicly owned through our partners, many of who are in the room, who provide publicly owned housing. So the housing infrastructure bond created in 2012 uses the private activity tax exempt bonds as the largest state source of capital to invest in our housing needs. And they remain something very unique. All of our peer states are jealous of because Minnesota is able to invest at this level year after year in increasing amounts with housing infrastructure bonds. And over the years, we've expanded the uses, and these 6 graphics here quickly show you what we use the housing infrastructure bonds for. They are used to preserve federally assisted rental housing, to build and renovate permanent supportive housing, to create affordable housing for seniors ages 55 and older, to invest in manufactured home communities, parks across the state. Pausing on that for a moment, this is really important work that we do at Minnesota Housing. Parks across the state have a lot of infrastructure needs with privately owned sewer, water, electrical, roads, and other needs that the communities just simply cannot afford to keep up on their own. And so these resources go toward improving often failing systems and huge life improvement with the investments we make in manufactured home communities. We also develop single-family homes and land trusts and construct deeply affordable units, and this was a new use in our 2023 outcomes. Some great examples just to show you what we do with these resources, starting with Welch Place in Duluth. With $5.2 million of housing infrastructure bonds, for 30 units, we can accomplish, ending homelessness for 30 households, and year over year, having new households move in, with 24-hour front desk staffing and other services to help people with housing stability. Rental housing preservation, we get great coverage, geographic coverage across the state with housing infrastructure bonds in preservation work. This example here in Hutchinson is $2.3 million to acquire and preserve a federally assisted property with actually the USDA's rental assistance for households, and 24 renters benefit from that program. And then manufactured home communities in Redwood Falls. This is an overhead shot of a community that, for a very modest investment of $440,000, we're able to make improvements that help with failing systems, roads, sewers, and a storm sewer system as well. And Redwood Falls in this one also contributed to the project to make it happen. Single-family new construction, some great innovative work happening in Golden Valley with $3.3 million in housing infrastructure, creating 20 new homes in a community land trust. And these have a little bit more density that Golden Valley has been pursuing, with some duplexes and row homes included. So in summary, in the years that we have been working with the Housing Infrastructure Bond Program, $612 million has been committed. Often we can use the housing infrastructure bonds to leverage other resources, including federal tax credits and federal development sources. Nearly 6,000 units have been created and preserved, including those that are currently in the pipeline at Minnesota Housing. And 55% of the rental households we served were Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And 56% included a person with a disability. We've added these new uses every year. The agency learns, along with our community of providers, to use housing infrastructure bonds, including $80 million that's gone to single-family home development or home ownership development, and then manufactured home community acquisition and infrastructure. So that's the $50 million in housing infrastructure bonds. Moving to the $7.5 million in public housing. Across the state, we have public housing, much of it built in the 1970s, 80s maybe, that is publicly owned. And the federal government has not kept up with deferred maintenance. This is a well-known challenge in the housing industry across the country. And this program allows us to do some really great improvements to properties, often focused on taking high-rise or concrete, multi-story buildings and doing modernization of features that keep them accessible and safe, particularly for seniors and people with disabilities in greater Minnesota, as well as achieving energy efficiency and addressing some deferred maintenance issues that threaten the long-term use of the buildings. This one's a great example because if you know Wilmer, you know that this is a pretty big building, and this 127-unit building built in 1971 is general occupancy, but with many elderly and disabled residents. And it received funding that has helped them do air conditioning, asbestos removal, and otherwise address some of the conditions that come along with a 1971 building that just doesn't have the reserves to take care of units. Another example you know well, likely the Cedar high-rise apartments. The public housing rehabilitation funds helped us fund a scope of work that included the installation of a fire sprinkler system throughout the building, which is a very important upgrade, and I'm sure you'll hear about that today from one of our testifiers. So we do have this public housing funding currently available. The request for proposals for $41 million of this is open, with applications due in just a couple of days. And we know that the demand remains very high with the owners of public housing letting us know that about $100 million is their urgent, immediate need. And I think it's great to see on this next slide a map of where the public housing funding has been able to serve communities across the state. Pretty much every small town in greater Minnesota, and then much larger public housing entities in the Twin Cities and Duluth have public housing, and these funds have gone 64% to greater Minnesota. So I will wrap up and then help us move along by just saying thank you, and thank you for considering the $50 million for housing infrastructure bonds and $7.5 million for public housing rehab.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Members, any questions? Representative Carroll.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I probably know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway. So you didn't mention anything about NOAA properties, naturally occurring affordable housing. Would any of these programs be relevant for those?
Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, members of the committee. So the question is about naturally occurring affordable housing, which usually is defined as unsubsidized, so not currently having any federal or even state or local resources that help to maintain lower or stabilized rents. And we have a newer program from the 2023 legislative session, the Community Stabilization Program, that is, there's currently a survey out to our partners as we develop the program design, and that is intended for the NOAA properties. But unless a property were converting into housing subsidy, it would not be eligible in the categories that are currently offered in the Housing Infrastructure Bond Authorization.
Thank
If I
you.
understand the question.
Representative Carroll.
I'm good, thank you.
Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Deputy Commissioner, I want to thank you for your presentation. Certainly, housing is a big concern, affordable housing a big concern, and should be for the people of Minnesota. It's hard to get people to come out to greater Minnesota and work if they don't have any place to live. Now, we do have some questions and concerns, I think, about the housing issue itself. But most of that, I think, is going to be reserved to the next stop for the bill. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Erdahl. Commissioner, can you just let us know of the $200 million that was authorized in HIB's last session? How many have been expended?
We selected projects, and I'm sorry I don't have this in front of me, but from last year in the legislative session, it was actually appropriated cash under the housing infrastructure authorization. And that was both for the housing infrastructure and the public housing renovation funds. And we did commit a significant portion of it. I don't know if Amanda knows we can get back to you with the specific amount, but between this year and next year, we'll allocate those resources, and we have very strong demand. You're only able to do about 1 in 5 of the applications that came in for the resources that were authorized.
Thank you. And then for the public housing rehab, I saw that you're entering into your RFP for $41 million. And so can you talk about how much have been expended, or is this the first round of the $72 million that was appropriated last session?
This is the first round of appropriated, and I think you'll hear from the public housing testifiers today as they talk about some of the just mismatch between federal contracts for funds and state and local contracts for funds when bonds are involved. And the cash has helped us to work with some projects that have federal funding that is a mismatch with bonding. But overall, it's just been a big award at the $41 million open RFP that is allowing us to catch up on some of the backlog of needs.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you, Commissioner, for coming by.
Thank you.
So next on the agenda, we have Chair Howard with House File 4271. And as the chair moves forward, I move the House File 4271 to get it before the committee with a recommendation that it be referred to the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee. And members, I do want to note that Chair Hansen and Representative Franzen both celebrated their birthdays last Friday, and so they have some treats for us, and I think Chair Hansen is passing it around right now. Welcome, Chair Howard. Please proceed.
Thank you. Hold on just a second. Thank you, Chair Lee and members of the committee. This bill that we have before you is very technical, but one that is very important for Minnesotans all across the state, and for our public housing authorities that provide public housing to Minnesotans from border to border. And at its core, this bill is about making sure that we're deploying every resource that we can that's available to address those needs through our public housing authorities that do this work all across the state. But I wanted to center the Minnesotans that are impacted because as we get into the weeds, it can become technical pretty quickly, but members keep that in mind. And to the technical piece, public housing authorities, they're always in the position of trying to maximize federal, state, local dollars to meet the needs of their community, needs that always far outpace what those resources are available. In order to leverage more federal dollars, HUD has created a path for public housing authorities to reposition their public housing units. And what does that mean? I'm going to let some of our testifiers speak more specifically, but essentially, public housing authorities are able to create really a copy of itself, same board, same membership, the same purposes in order to access these federal resources. And where we run into challenge is with MMB has cited potential constitutional issues with terming the repositioning organization as a wholly public entity, which creates challenges for those entities to access GO bonding for public housing rehab. And what this is doing is forcing public housing authorities to make a choice. Go after these federal resources, but if doing so, they may not be able to access GO bonding for public housing, when really both are essential, both are critical, and there really should be a path to do both. So what this bill does is provides clarity to the definition of what would be considered a public entity, with the language modeled after scenarios that have already been approved by MMB, so that public housing authorities, we can be confident, are public entities, and public housing authorities are able to pursue resources at both the state and federal level to deploy to address the needs in their community. So in closing, if it looks like a duck, swims like a duck, and quacks like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And if public housing authorities look like a public housing authority, act like one, is governed in the same way as one, then the state of Minnesota should treat them as one. And with that, I'll turn it over to my testifiers.
Thank you, Chair Har. Welcome, Director. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon. I'm Melissa Taphorn. I'm the Executive Director of the Washington County Community Development Agency, or CDA, and I'm also the Legislative Chair for Minnesota NARO, which stands for the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. Chair Lee and committee members, thank you for your consideration of House File 4271. You've heard repeatedly about the shortfall of federal funds for public housing, and you have responded repeatedly with general obligation bonds for publicly owned housing program rehab funds, and we thank you for that. We really appreciate all of the work that you have brought to the money that you've brought to the table, and the work that the support you've given to our work. Housing authorities continue to look for other means to not only address that capital backlog, as well as keep up with the maintenance of our public housing. And HUD has even provided us with some of the paths to do that. They call it repositioning. These repositioning paths allow housing authorities to bring in other federal funds as well as borrow as needed to address the property's capital needs, which currently we cannot do under the public housing model. A couple of these paths require the housing authority to create a separate entity while still in the housing authority's control. However, we're unable to do that if we have a POP loan or intend to apply for one, because that new entity is not considered a public entity according to Minnesota management and budget for the purposes of general obligation bonds. This bill attempts to cure that. It is important to note that it does not expand the number of properties, nor does it circumvent the public purpose and public ownership eligibility of general obligation bonds. My colleagues from Minneapolis and Carver County will share the impacts to their portfolio, but while you listen to their stories, I want you to keep in mind what Deputy Commissioner Robinson said, that most of the housing authorities in Minnesota that have public housing are extremely small entities. Most of them are in greater Minnesota and have, staff of less than 5 people in their office, which is important given the technicality of these pathways. And they don't have in-house counsel to advise them or negotiate a case-by-case situation with MMB. For my housing authority in Washington County, we took out a POP loan of $271,000 about 10 years ago to against a 40-unit public housing building, which is our only public housing units. We'd like to reposition that property to a housing choice voucher platform where the amount HUD would pay us has the potential from going from $280 a month per unit to $1,020 a month per unit. That alone gives us $355,000 in 1 year to reinvest back in the property. Right now, we'd have to wait until 2051 when the POP loan restrictions expire, even if we were to pay it off, but we can't do that until to consider repositioning. Look forward to working with you to find a clear and transparent process to ensure a long-term solution for public housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Next, we have Director Wasame from Minneapolis Public Housing Authority. Welcome, Director. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Thank you, Chair Lee. My name is Abdi Warsami. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority.
Please proceed.
All right, thank you. Currently, MPHA maintains nearly 700 deeply affordable family homes across nearly every neighborhood of the city of Minneapolis. For years, these homes existed in MPHA's Section 9 or public housing program. During that time, they amassed a major capital backlog following decades of federal disinvestment in public housing. To help preserve these homes, in 2020, MPHA converted this portfolio from Section 9 public housing to the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. The conversion was guided by HUD and led to the utilization of a wholly controlled nonprofit community housing resources that could receive the federal Section 8 funding. Through the conversion and transfer to CHR, MPHA was able to more than double the federal subsidy it received for operating the same homes with the same households. However, it is this conversion that MMB has since determined makes these homes now ineligible for POP GEO bonds. Despite being the same MPHA residents, served by the same MPHA team members, guided by the same CEO, staff, and Board of Commissioners, MMB has determined this portfolio is ineligible. We know that because of this, we have an exact example. When we did the conversion, 2 of those 700 plus homes had repairs previously funded by POP GEO bonds, and therefore MMB refused to let us convert them. That means we have 2 family homes receiving less than half the federal subsidy that they could be getting, further worsening our capital backlog challenge because of MMB's decision. Now, I can appreciate MMB's caution in protecting public bonding dollars, but what gets lost in this conversation is the more than 3,100 people living in these homes with a collective backlog of $33 million in maintenance and repair needs. Of the 3,100 CHR residents, 88% are Black, 86% are female-led households, and more than half are children. Well-meaning lawyers and MMB staff might tell you all the technical reasons for why MPHA's wholly controlled nonprofit doesn't perfectly fit MMB's definition of publicly owned. But I'm here to tell you that for every day we spend going back and forth on a specific word in a state statute, it's another day a leaky roof isn't repaired, it's another day an old draft window isn't replaced, and it's another day we risk decades-old electrical or plumbing systems failing because we cannot access POP GEO bonds for these homes. I urge members of this committee to support aligning federal best practices with existing state programs and ensure that the most economically vulnerable families in Minneapolis and in our state are invested in the way the legislators intended when it passed more than $40 billion in POP GEO bonds last session. Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity you gave me today.
Thank you, Director. Next, for testimony, we have Director Strike from Carver County CDA. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Lee and committee members, my name is Allison Strike. I'm the Deputy Director of Carver County Community Development Agency and the Vice President of the Minnesota NARO Board of Directors. I want to thank you for your consideration of House File 42771. And on behalf of the 140 agency members of NARO, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today and your continued support of GO bonds for public housing. In 2013, the CDA utilized GO bonds to rehab Spruce Apartments, a 31-unit complex consisting of 1, 2, 3, and 4-bedroom townhomes. The POP funding consisted of $243,000 and was used for site work, interior work, electrical, and mechanical upgrades. Due to continually being underfunded by Congress, the CDA made the decision to reposition its public housing program under the Rental Assistance Demonstration Act, or RAD. And we repositioned to project-based vouchers. The CDA's public housing had been continually running in the red, and in an effort to not defer maintenance, the CDA had been putting some of its levy funding into the public housing program every year. This, along with the administrative burden that comes along with administering the public housing program, made the decision clear to our agency. Our program has been running in the black since we converted under RAD in 2018, and the CDA has not needed to provide any of its levy funding for maintenance and repairs. The CDA started the RAD conversion process early in 2017, and when we first approached Minnesota Housing, we were told we would not be able to convert due to the POP funding, or that we could convert our 50 scattered site units, but not the 31 units at Spruce Apartments. However, since we did not have our own housing choice voucher program, our agency did not need to create a separate entity to convert, so it was ultimately approved. Many of our smaller housing authorities across the state do not have levy funds to access for maintenance and repair of their public housing. They have access POP funding and are now at the point where repositioning it is a great option for their agency as Congress continues to underfund the public housing program. However, many housing authorities are not able to reposition due to the POP funding they have accessed in the past, or knowing they may need to access those funds in the future. There have been several examples of agencies that have been able to reposition with POP funding. This bill aims to clarify language around POP funding and housing authorities repositioning their public housing program. Again, we thank you for your time and look forward to continuing to work with you on this issue.
Thank you, Director. Next, we have Assistant Commissioner Hassemer from Minnesota Management and Budget. Welcome, Commissioner. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon to members of the committee. For the record, I'm Jennifer Hassemer, Assistant Commissioner at Minnesota Management and Budget. Thank you for the opportunity to make some brief comments on House File 4271 here today. This is an issue that MMB has been engaged on for many years with both the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency and the Minnesota chapter of the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials. We appreciate conversations with Chair Howard on this issue as well, and look forward to continued discussions about the technical aspects of this bill. Unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development did not design the Rental Assistance Demonstration, or RAD program, with Minnesota's Constitution in mind. And there are challenges in making the RAD program work for public housing authorities that have received state bonds in the past and that may seek them again in the future. The Constitution requires that state bonds can only be appropriated for projects owned by state agencies or political subdivisions of the state. MMB's ongoing interest in this conversation will be protecting the validity of the state's bonds and ensuring the constitutional public ownership requirement continues to be met. We may not be able to find a solution for all cases of RAD, but look forward to discussions about what may be possible with all interested stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Seeing no other testifiers, we'll move over to members' questions. Members, any discussion? Well, Chair Howard, with no members' discussion, I would just close by thanking you and for all of our HRAs in the state of Minnesota and MMB for, trying to work on this issue. I know that this is something that has popped up since my first term on the committee back in 2019, 2020. And, I'm hopeful that we can continue to work with all of the advocates who are, working for some of our most vulnerable Minnesotans, providing housing for them. And then also with our state agencies to move forward on this issue. And so with that, any closing comments?
Chair, thank you for your partnership on this as well. It has been a multiple-year process, and the time has come. We need to figure this out. I just want to thank Assistant Commissioner Hesselman for also sharing offline that they plan to meet with representatives of NARO to continue to discuss this issue. We need to find a solution. I believe this bill can be that solution, and if not, we need to keep working to find one. But this is the year to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. I renew my motion that House File 4271 is referred to the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and House File 4271 is referred to the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee. Next on the agenda is Chair Howard, House File 4194. Welcome, Chair Howard, again. I move House File 4271 to get it before the committee with a recommendation that it is referred to the Housing, Finance, and Policy Committee. There are no amendments, so please proceed, Chair Howard.
Thank you, Chair Lee. This bill, like the presentation from the governor, is about housing infrastructure bonds and appropriating those bonds. This bill has a little bit more money than the presentation we heard from the governor's team. This bill would provide $500 million investments in housing infrastructure bonds. And what's important to note here, this is a bill that provides a level of investment that's consistent with the need. Housing infrastructure bonds, as you heard from the governor and Minnesota Housing's team, has been really the state's key tool to build affordable housing units, especially deeply affordable housing units. And last year, the legislature approved $200 million in housing infrastructure bonds. And those resources are life-changing, creating hundreds, if not thousands, of units, serving thousands of families, especially our lowest income families. And we know from the data that the needs continue to grow. More than 600,000 Minnesotans are paying more than 30% of their income in housing, and that's especially acute for our lowest income Minnesotans. And that's also where we have the largest gaps, where we're over 100,000 units short of deeply affordable housing. And housing infrastructure bonds really are our state's key tool to continue to build these homes that help meet this crushing supply-demand mismatch we have all across the state. I would note from the presentation from Minnesota Housing that even with our historic level investment, they're still saying no to 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5 folks that come forward with proposals. The need is there. Nonprofit and communities and folks across the state are stepping up. They're saying we're ready, but this does require the public investment, and that's what this bill provides. Additionally to the $500 million investment in HIBs, this bill adds and clarifies a few new uses, including the use of funds to recapitalize affordable housing developments. This is particularly important for our developers that are doing supportive housing for our deeply affordable housing. Through the pandemic, there's been really a perfect storm for those developers of increased insurance costs, security costs, rent issues. Really, it's added up to be a really difficult scenario. We provided some resources to address those needs last year. This would provide another tool in the toolbox to help our providers stabilize and make sure that we're protecting units of housing for affordable units of housing. This would also add up a new eligible use for housing cooperatives, again, another tool in this instance for an affordable home ownership opportunity. Members, we made big investments in housing last session, but we are not going to solve our state's affordable housing crisis with one-time investments. We need to keep our eye on the ball and our foot on the gas and listen to Minnesotans all across the state that are saying we need to meet the moment, and that's what this bill represents. With that, I'll turn it over to my testifier.
Thank you, Chair Howard. And before the testifier proceed, do want to correct my motion that this is to move House File 4194 before the committee. Welcome. Please identify yourself and proceed.
Chair Lee, members of the committee, my name is Elena Gorder. I am the Chief Executive Officer with the Metropolitan Consortium of Community Developers, or as we like to say, MCCD. MCCD is a consortium of nonprofit affordable housing developers and economic development associations across the state of Minnesota. I first want to thank Chair Howard and all members of the legislature for their historic investments in affordable housing last session. That investment is supporting the full continuum of affordable housing, from rental assistance, first-generation down payment assistance, development funds for deeply affordable housing, and more. I'm here today to ask you to continue to build on this investment so we can make further progress in the state. As Chair Howard mentioned, housing infrastructure bonds have been so critical to helping Minnesota make progress towards our housing shortage. House File 4194 proposes to invest $500 million in HIBs so that we can address the structural imbalances in many of our existing deeply affordable state-funded assets and continue to make new investments in the development of single-family homes, housing cooperatives, senior housing, and other deeply affordable rental properties. Since HIBs were created in 2012, the legislature has invested over $700 million, helping permanently house 7,000 residents. However, right now, about a third of those residents are at risk of losing their housing. This is because affordable housing providers, at no fault of their own, have been struggling to keep their developments open. Some of the examples Chair Howard mentioned, I'll add a little bit of greater detail to that. So there was a survey that was done by 29 of the 43 organizations that received short funds in the past session. And you mentioned rental arrears. Of those responding, they have over $11 million in losses in rental arrears alone. 38% increase in insurance costs, some as high as 50%. And so the challenges that many of them are facing are just stacking on top of one another, creating significant barriers in the state. So in summary, many of our state-supported affordable housing units need additional investment to ensure their longevity as deeply affordable homes. Plus, large investments from the legislature will allow our members to continue to develop new single-family homes, new rental housing, and with the addition of new uses, including housing cooperatives. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I can take any questions that you might have.
Members, any discussion? Seeing none, I will just include a few remarks. Really appreciate you bringing this bill forward, Chair Howard, and like I mentioned to you and other advocates, I think just want to put it on the record that as we make decision on, investing in infrastructure, I will hope that if we move forward with this bill with a recapitalization, that organizations actually have planned to address their own deferred maintenance, and for those that have been funded with state, funding for them, to really look at how are they going to have a plan to address their deferred maintenance going forward and not rely on the state to make the secondary investment in the future, because as we have seen all session, and I have a few bills coming up in future committee hearings to really address that conversation around how do we address deferred maintenance as a whole, and to make sure that we're not continuing to invest in assets that have received bond dollars before, when we have competition for all of these dollars for critical infrastructure in our communities. And so just really want to put that on the record, and really appreciate your work on this. Chair Howard, any closing comments?
Chair Lee, members, I appreciate the comments, and would just say that I think having long-term plan to stability is critical in this body of work, and I think that's where this legislation is coming from and where the conversation should continue. Providing a significant level of investment like this bill calls, I think, is a part of a path to getting there. This legislature has had a bipartisan track record of understanding housing infrastructure bonds, and hopeful this session we can move forward as well in that spirit because of just the utility of such an important tool we have to address our needs across the state. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair Howard. I now renew my motion that House File 4194 is referred to the Housing Finance and Policy Committee. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The motion prevails and House File 4194 is referred to the Housing Finance and Policy Committee. Thank you, Chair Howard. Member, next up on the agenda is House File 3631, which is my bill. We'll be hearing it on an informational basis only. And then I do want to note the DE amendment that's for reference only. No formal actions will be taken on this bill today. And members and for the public, before we get started, I would like to strongly encourage all of you to get any additional modifications that's not covered in the DE to myself, our researcher, Chelsea Griffin, and the committee administrator, Jenny Nash, as soon as possible. And we will be compiling another DE amendment to House File 3631 that will formally be acted upon at a later hearing. And it is very important for members of the public that you make sure all modifications have been approved by the granting agencies. I don't want us to make corrections whenever we take this up, and then down the line, you need to make another modification. And so it's important for you to work with the granting agencies and also perhaps MMB if needed. So I do just want to note the DE amendment. I won't go through it in depth because we still know that there are outstanding corrections out there. And for any of you who have anything in particular that's not in here, just let us know. And so with that, members, since we're not taking any formal actions, if you have any questions, comments, let me know. Representative Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was just wondering on the subdivision 7, the Douglas County Highway 29, wasn't there supposed to be a line there that said this should be named the Franzen Bridge? Was there an oversight there?
Thank you, Representative Erdahl. I'm not sure if there's any oversight on that piece. And I believe, Chair Murphy has said that we have a history of not naming anything after any current members, and so we'll have to wait on that.
Don't worry, in my mind.
Okay, so with that, members, I really appreciate all of you being here today to help us move those two bills out. And then on this, again, I would like to make a final plea to all of you and to members of the public to have, if you have any modifications, run it through your grantee agency so that the language can be the way it is that you all need it to work so that your project can move forward. And so having no formal action, I do want to note that our next meeting will be Wednesday, March 6th. On the agenda is more or government overview for the governor's recommendations. We will have DNR, Bowser, and MnDOT, and the Met Council. And then for members of the committee on Friday, we will be taking a tour at the Minneapolis Veterans Home and the Bloomington Armory with the Vets and Military Affairs Committee. Chair Nguyen has been generous enough to get us a bus, and so we will be taking a bus. The bus will load at 8:20 on the Capitol side of the SOB and depart at 8:30. And please respond to Jenny Nash if you are going or not so that we know to have a head count. And with that, Representative Scraba.
How long is that?
Ms. Nash.
We'll be back we're leaving at 11:30, we'll be back here by noon.
So what's the 8 o'clock?
Well, 8:30 today.
Leaving there from at 11:30.
Yeah, we'll leave Bloomington at
Okay,
11:30.
so we're leaving here at 8:30. We'll be back by noon.
Yes.
Thank you.
And so I do want to know now with Representative Franzen here too that, both Representative Franzen and Chair Hansen provided some pastries for all of us for their birthday that was on Friday, March 1st. And so thank you all, and this meeting is adjourned.